everyone, and thank you for joining this episode of Entrepreneurial Appetite, a series of events dedicated to building community, promoting intellectualism, and supporting Black businesses. My name is Langston Clark, and I'm the founder and organizer of these events. And I want to give you a brief introduction into some of the things that we do in addition to having these monthly shows. And I'm excited because in addition to our monthly shows, this show is actually part of a special that we're doing that focuses on Black outdoor entrepreneurs, activists, and just people in the outdoor industry space. But first, part of our mission, as I said, is to support Black businesses. And when I think about Black businesses, I think about that broadly, and that includes Black institutions. And so as a graduate of North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University, those of you who support the show through our Patreon or who make donations to come to our live recordings, 10% of what you give goes to an endowment that I started with two colleagues of mine who went to North Carolina A&T. The endowment supports the From A&T to PhD scholarship in the graduate school and the College of Education at A&T, because the three of us are all graduates of A&T, but our doctorates are in or going to be in education-related fields. I also want to make you aware that in my main job as a college professor, I do research and I teach about African Americans in sport. And so with two other colleagues and friends of mine, we started the African Americans in Sport podcast. This is a unique podcasting format where you all as an audience get to peer into our world as college professors and hear lessons and hear from speakers who can talk about the experiences of African Americans in sport broadly. And that's not limited to what happens on the playing field. We're talking to people who are scholars, who are historians, former student athletes who have started their own businesses, people who work in athletics departments, people who work in professional leagues. We give you really a 360-degree view of what it means to be an African Americans in sport, both on the field and outside of it. So without further ado, I want to segue to our primary conversation today with Tiffany Blount, who is the founder of Black Girls Boulder. And so I'm going to allow Tiffany to tell us a little about herself and talk about what Black Girls Boulder does, and maybe just tell us what bouldering is to begin with, because we might need some definition there. So Tiffany.
Thank you, Langston. Thank you for having me on your show. I appreciate it. And I love to talk about bouldering. So bouldering is actually a discipline of rock climbing. Most people are more familiar with rope climbing, but bouldering is a little bit more unique in that you don't actually need a bunch of technical gear to do the sport. Typically, you wouldn't climb much higher than 10 to 20 feet on a shorter rock. And the only gear you really need are a pair of shoes and a crash pad that might resemble a mattress. If you're not familiar with what a crash pad looks like, just think of taking a mattress out, folding it like a book, but you open it up, put it on the ground so that if you were to fall off the boulder, you would be supported to some degree. So that is bouldering. I fell in love with bouldering, I would say probably around 2019. It wasn't bouldering that I fell in love with. I actually just fell in love with climbing in 2016. And it was a bit of a fluke. I was on vacation, got exposed to it during a Google "what should you do in Colorado" situation. And one of the top 3 things to do in Colorado, especially during the time I was there, is rock climbing. So I fell in love with it instantly. And some people fall in love instantly. Some people, it's something you grow towards. But I basically fully immersed myself in the space. And at that time, I was 35. So what I did not realize, because I come from more of a competitive sport background, I played basketball, ran track. I really liked the puzzle part of bouldering, and I liked the physical part of it. And I liked the fact that I didn't necessarily need someone else there with me. And I was all in. So I started competing recreationally, because I didn't realize that with rock climbing, it's one of those sports where you have to start early to be elite. It's not one of those sports where if you just work really, really hard and lift a lot of weights, you'll get strong. It's a lot of years of building up certain muscles in your fingers that you just can't play catch up with. So I started Black Girls Boulder in 2020, mostly because I didn't see myself represented in the sport. I didn't see myself represented in the sport competitively, recreationally, or even socially, because I did start getting involved with Brown Girls Climb, an organization I'm still involved with. And even in those spaces, I didn't see a lot of Black women. And for me, as someone who comes from an education background, I didn't want my people to get involved in this sport and get hurt. And I didn't want us to get involved and not have that emotional support that you sometimes need when you're in a competitive space. So yeah, Black Girls Boulder was initially meant to be more of an education space, more of a competitive space, but it got a little tricky because it's really hard to get Black women to try this type of climbing. Like even now, I mean, I have events and, they're never these massive turnouts that they could be if I did a woman focused event or a brown person focused event where I can get a bigger demographic out. And so I tend to get these small groups. And a lot of times I get people who've never done it before. And the idea of saying, hey, I want you to compete. They're like, nah, you lucky if I get up on this wall. I'm not about to compete against anyone. So there's been a bit of a transformation in the mission behind what I do, and truthfully the future of where I'm going with that initiative. And I did start my own business in 2021 called First Outdoor Company that really is the space that's going to allow me to create these education focused events, these spaces where I really want to give Black folks a space to learn about climbing, to immerse themselves in climbing. And of course, my focus is bouldering, mostly because that's the easier entry into the sport, because rope climbing is complicated.
So I wanna backtrack just a little bit, and if you could break down the levels of climbing, like is there a level below bouldering? Is bouldering like middle bottom? Like what's like from A to Z the different ways that you can climb? Like how does that break down?
So there's not necessarily levels, but I will say to some degree, it kind of starts with what's called hiking. You may have even heard it as mountaineering, although a lot of mountaineering starts to go into terrain that can get a bit treacherous and is way more dangerous than other forms of rock climbing. But I always like to start people out with hiking, and there's something called rock scrambles, where if you go hiking and there's a point where you need to use your hands to navigate the trail, that's a rock scramble. And I did that before I ever even knew about rock climbing, and that was why it was such an easy transition for me. Now the other forms of rock climbing are not, it's not exponential, so you have sport climbing, which involves a rope, a harness, a helmet, clipping your gear into those pieces and bringing that rope up with you. So as you clip, you have secured yourself, but you're only secure from the last point that you clipped into, hence my injury. But that's another discussion. The next form is traditional climbing. Now, traditional climbing is kind of the OG of climbing. That's where it started. That was when folks would take these, what was called pythons, they look like a big nail, and hammer them into the rock and then secure themselves into that and then continue that process. And so technology has, of course, improved. And now there's these pieces called cams and nuts. And it's the same concept. You are the one responsible for securing yourself. So you place these pieces of gear in between cracks in the rock and you're secure, but you're only secure from the last place that you placed a piece of gear. And then you have top roping, which is what most people do in a gym, where there's a rope at the top, somebody else at the bottom, you climb up and they bring you back down. And that's quite possibly the best way to start someone out in climbing. People tend to feel a little bit more secure on a rope than they do with bouldering because there's nothing securing you. And a lot of us are afraid of falling. It's natural. But you will fall. And at times you will fall unexpectedly, and you have to really understand how to fall so that you don't get injured. So all of those have their own different grade levels. Even for mountaineering, there's like class 5 climbing, which, at that point you have to be on a rope and it's a little bit more dangerous than a scramble. And then from bouldering, a V0 or a V beginner up to a V, typically 9 in a gym. But if you go outside, it can get higher. And then if you're on ropes, traditional or sport, it's on a different grading scale where it's a 5-0 up to 5-13, such. It can get really high. I think it's up to like 5-14 plus, maybe even higher than that. So there's different grade ranges. And within each discipline, there's difficulty levels. But I wouldn't say one is easier than the other than top roping is the thing that folks tend to feel more comfortable with. So.
Wow. It's very, very technical, or at least it seems that way as someone who's not a boulder or a climber. I'm really interested because you talked about you have a background in education, right? And you created Black Girls Boulder to educate Black women. And the name of your company again, say it one more time.
First Outdoor Company.
And First Outdoor Company, I think, to educate Black folk or expose Black folk more broadly to the outdoors and climbing and bouldering and whatnot. But I want to know about your sport and education background before you got into bouldering and climbing. How did you make that transition? Were you a K through 12 teacher or just educating generally, like in the community? How did that transition you into what you do now?
Yeah, so from the moment I was in college, I knew I wanted to teach. I didn't necessarily have my eyes set on a specific level, but I was in this sort of fine line between, I was a DJ, I love music. I was born on 8/1/81, which is the same day that MTV came on air. And so for me, I thought it was a natural transition that I would work in broadcast television, specifically music television. And I actually had the opportunity, and it wasn't what I expected, which, as you know, even in the early 2000s, MTV was no longer about music. It was about reality shows, and that just didn't interest me. So I made a transition to focus on getting my master's degree. I chose that path because going back to get a second ed degree just did not seem as practical for where I was in my life. I had owned a house. I was settled. I was like, I can't go and teach at a school for free for a year. The whole process of going back to school to get a second ed degree is very difficult when you already have a bachelor's. So I went and got my master's because I knew that would at least get me in the door to teaching. And I started teaching on the college level, broadcast communications. And it was mostly community college. I did work at a liberal arts college a little bit, the one I went to get my master's in. And it was fine. I didn't love it, but I mixed that with freelance video production work, which again is what I essentially teach. And I had been doing that for a few years, and then I decided a relationship decided I needed to get out of my hometown of St. Louis, Missouri. And I went to New York, which is where I always wanted to be. And I came with no job, I just assumed I have a master's. I'm smart. I'm gonna get a job. And fortunately, that positive mentality got me a job because little did I know that is not realistic. And apparently, it's very hard to get a job in New York City, even back in 2012. And so when I got here, I fell in love with the outdoors. And I was so surprised because I was like, I thought this was the concrete jungle, but I see parks everywhere. It's so much more green than it was where I came from. My allergies were way worse here than they were in St. Louis. And so from there, I started hiking, and I actually started my first YouTube series called The Black Girls Guide to Outer Spaces. And again, this is before I ever even knew rock climbing existed. I was just like, I love being outside. I love climbing or hiking at the time. And I wanted to educate people about how to hike safely, especially because even in New York State, as diverse as it is, it's not. You'll be the only Black person on the trail the entire day. And, I recently have heard stories of people being attacked verbally. And, it's just an uncomfortable situation. But just there's things to understand about how to hike, how to read trail markers, how to navigate sunscreen because we think we don't need sunscreen. And so I was that series, I really enjoyed doing it. But as soon as I got into climbing, my entire focus just shifted and I couldn't do that series anymore. And so I switched that video series to Black Girls Boulder, which was mostly just me vlogging and sharing my progression as a new climber. And then I started getting into, some educational stuff about bouldering. So for folks who don't know a lot about how to navigate certain climbing techniques and chalk and all of this. And so I was working on a series to do that. And then I had a traumatic climbing injury in 2021 that put a pause on a lot of things for me. Climbing is very, very mental. And if you talk to climbers, especially Black climbers, they will tell you that it is extremely therapeutic. Although I'm sure we should all be in therapy, and I am a big proponent of therapy, it is one of those things where you can completely let yourself go. And anything that you have on your mind goes away because you're so focused on how do I get up and back down this wall safely. And so it's transformative. And for those who have fallen in love with it, they can relate to exactly what I'm saying. And I lost it through this injury. Like I lost my love for it. And it was unfortunate because it was the year I started my business and started planning the biggest event that I've ever planned. And, essentially trying to be my legacy in this space. And so, luckily I'm healing and I'm getting back. So yeah, I feel a little better now.
So one, I there are a few things that I admire about your story. The first one is related to something that I talk about a lot on the podcast with a number of speakers. There's a Black orthodoxy that exists that sometimes puts us in a box, and we have these things where we say Black people don't do that, and something as simple as going to the park in New York City might be a thing that, like, yeah, I could do that, but like subconsciously you're not going to the park because Black people really don't do that in New York, And if I had to guess, I think whatever it is that was in you to say, like, you're going to go to the park, and it was greener in New York City than it is in St. Louis. And then that transitioned you into becoming Black Girls Boulder. Like, I think that thing, that whatever it was that kept pushing you to do those things, is going to help you get over the injury. You know what I mean? And get back into, the rock climbing and the things like that. Because that's whatever that is that's in you that motivated to continue doing that. I think just in the read of what you've been saying, I hope and I know and I believe that it's going to push you to continue doing what you're doing with Black Girls Boulder, and even you doing it yourself.
Yeah, it's true. I'm getting there. And I've been told by many people who've had injuries that you will get past this phase. And it is just a mental phase. And it's just kind of like you lost the juice and now it's slowly filling back up. So I'm confident I'll get there.
But even that experience is something that's new, because in some ways you're a pioneer, right? And so if you're the first one, or in the space that you're in, you're the first one to do it. Like, that's part of the story. Like, somebody else is going to have an injury, and then you going through it could be the thing that, like, helps get them through. So I appreciate you sharing that. I also know that, like, you had mentioned before that you had done some work and had volunteered with some other organizations that deal with the outdoors. Can you talk about how that volunteer work, and maybe name some of those organizations, how they sort of got you into starting your own organization and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the pioneer and the jump off is definitely Brown Girls Climb, because they were the inspiration and really kind of pushed me to do this. I really didn't want to create my own space. I was totally fine being in other spaces. And they held a climbing festival called Color the Crag in Alabama, and I went to that festival twice. And it wasn't until the second year that I was like, yeah, okay, fine. I think it is time for me to do my own thing. But that for that organization, first and foremost, was probably the most pivotal for me. Since then, I've been involved with quite a few other affinity spaces or groups, such as Try Hard Crew. Try Hard Crew has been interesting because they actually exposed me to route development, which is a form of route setting outside. So in gyms, the plastic holes are put up by people artificially, but when you go outside, we take a drill in most cases and we establish routes that have never been climbed before. So I actually established a route in Colorado called Patterson's Pitch, which was named after Mary Jane Patterson, the first documented Black woman to get a college degree. So it was, kind of a moment for me to have what's called a first ascent. And that space kind of got me involved, mostly in an indoor environment. But again, now I'm absolutely in love with the outdoor development way more than indoor route setting. And I've also volunteered with Young Women Who Crush, which is a Queens based project where young women from the area come to the gym in Queens and we mentor them on climbing for the season. We actually just wrapped up last week. So that space was difficult for me this year because I couldn't really do much of anything, but it has been a very fulfilling space. And then I'm also on the board of a couple of outdoor organizations, Rise Outside, which is a fairly new outdoor guiding company, and the Torn Valley Climbers Coalition, which is essentially the organization that advocates for climbing in the area that's closest to me. And we just had our trail day last week. So I stay busy and, I do have my hands in a lot of things. And there are potentially some other projects that gets me into the youth space, fingers crossed. And because that to me is pivotal to actually getting to the mission that I have, which is trying to see more representation in competitive climbing. And it will only happen when you start with the young people and you find pathways to mentor them and to get them the financial support that they need, because climbing is actually an extremely expensive sport to compete in, unlike sports that are typically associated with the African American community, football, baseball, basketball. No, it's nothing compared to that because you don't have to pay membership fees just to get access to the space. Right. And most of the areas, especially in New York City, where you want to climb, are inaccessible by train or bus. You have to have a way to get to it. And so young folks who can just go around a corner because there's a basketball court on every corner in New York City, that's access. This access doesn't exist in New York for climbing. And, it's going to be a long road. It's going to be a long time before, in my opinion, we see a Black American in the Olympics. I'm still rooting for the Canadians and the Europeans who have some Black representation competing, and that's still very minuscule, but that's something that is extremely important to me. And I'm hoping that by creating events that at least exposes our community to this sport, that can just spark something in them or spark something hopefully in their kid.
I had no idea that bouldering was an Olympic sport.
Yes. Yeah. It was supposed to be 2020, which really is confusing, but because the Olympics was canceled, but that was supposed to be the first year that rock climbing entered the sport. And there's 3 disciplines in the Olympics for rock climbing, and it's bouldering, lead climbing, and what's called speed, which is a bit new and weird, and a lot of us climbers don't understand speed climbing. I understand it.
Let me ask this. One, I want you to describe what speed climbing is, but the other thing is, because it's new, do you think that that's the best entry point to get Black youth involved with rock climbing?
Speed climbing specifically?
Yes.
So so speed climbing is a gym only thing. It's never been rooted in outdoor climbing unless you include climbers who have done a form of speed climbing that involves multi-pitch climbing, where you're climbing multiple tall walls, or they call them tall walls, going down to Yosemite, and you're climbing for hours and hours because it's a 20 pitch climb. And a pitch is typically around 40 feet. So
Mm.
you take that piece of rope, you climb up, you bring your partner up, and y'all go to the next pitch, and you go up and up and up.
Oh,
So some people have referred to that as speed climbing, but speed climbing in a competitive sense is, it's the exact same holds, exact same route. There's a timer at the top. You have two people side by side, and they both climb up, and the first one who taps the top of that timer wins. So there's it's I just don't get it. And
mm,
the funny thing about me not getting it is that they've already changed the rules for the 2024 Paris Olympics and said speed climbing will be its own discipline,
mm.
and bouldering and lead climbing will be a whole separate division, because a lot of people who are traditional boulders and climbers couldn't quite train for speed. They didn't, they struggled with success in
Yeah.
that area. And it affected, their ability to excel in the Olympics. So I'm really excited that they split it off.
But I'm saying because it's split and it's new and it's different, like that might be our entry point, and then we just go backwards from there. If you like the
So
speed stuff,
I don't think so. The funny thing about it is, I don't think you need speed to make kids interested in climbing. You
mm,
just got to get them in the door.
yeah,
Because the thing about a lot of kids is they naturally are climbers.
they
Like, it's
are.
not
Hmm.
something that you have to really push on them.
Mm,
There's just going to be that one kid who's like, I want to compete. Like, I enjoy this sport. I love this sport. I love this space. A lot of youth athletes do go through a period, though, of separation from the sport, because the competing at such an early age, which truthfully, in my opinion, you have to start no later than 8 to
mm,
really excel. And by the time you get to 18, you just want to go to college and chill. Like,
mm,
it's just, so you've
yeah,
been competing for almost 10 years, if not 10 years, and you're over it for a minute. And then you can kind of come back into it. But there's climbers who are 24 who are considered old. Like,
wow,
yeah, like they're considered old, and they're 16-year-olds. And I say this because the World Cup is actually happening right now. There's a period between April and November when there's the International Federation for Climbers. It's just, and I butchered that acronym, but it's basically the IFSC. It's something that happens throughout that period, and it's the elite of the elite of international climbers. And yeah, it's definitely, it's a lot to be a part of, and it's a lot of your life. And it's not the same recognition as basketball, where you can get
hmm,
endorsements, and that's something that I'm transitioning Black Girls Boulder into, because there's an athlete, Addie Wright, who is one of the few competitive climbers in New York City. Now, she's like mid 20s. She's still a young woman,
hmm,
but she's competing against 16-year-olds who they've been climbing longer than her, and they're 16.
yeah,
So, but I'm trying to get into a space of representing Black women as climbers. So, not just helping train them, coach them, teach them. Yeah, so a big part of what I want to transition Black Girls Boulder into is representing Black women as climbers, because navigating when brands reach out to you and knowing what your worth is, there's no formula for that like it is in other sports. And this is new. And a lot of companies are going to take advantage of this alien that is the Black woman on the wall, because
yeah,
we have not been in this space. And so, running workshops to introduce Black women to climbing, having training sessions, which I love to train, I love to work out, but how to get stronger as a climber, and then how to put yourself out there in that space. If you want to be in that space, if you want to be a model, if you want to be an athlete, and you want to be sponsored by brands, how to recognize the value of your brand and what that is, and how to represent yourself. So I'm excited. Addie's technically my first client, per se, and someone who is just an incredible human, period, but also someone that folks should watch out for if you are or get into climbing. Addie Climbs on Instagram. I have no shame in plugging all of the women that I work with, and even if they're just doing it for fun and not even competitively. I support them, their energy, and introducing them to the outside has been something I've been focusing a lot more on through the retreat that I have coming up, the festival that I have coming up, and then I'm actually running a competition in a
Mhm.
couple of months for it's really meant for people who have never competed, who are afraid to compete and trying to create this low stakes space where you can feel comfortable just trying out. And all the route setters will be non-binary or Black women, and I am really, really excited about it.
So what I hear you saying is that part of what you're going to be doing is like you're going to create the Rock Nation for Black women who want to climb. Is that what you doing?
Yes, I mean, if you want to associate it to like a record label, absolutely. I mean, I want there to be more representation, but I want to make sure that we know our worth and our value.
Mm.
And if there is someone out there who wants to be in that space but doesn't feel comfortable representing themselves, yeah, I'm all for being an athlete manager. It is something I'm very passionate about, as well as, like I said, trying to figure out a space to work with kids, which can be difficult. But there's some support out there, and there are some avenues where I think I can get in that space too.
Yeah. So talk about building community in a space or in spaces that don't fit the stereotype. Like how are you able to do that? Like if I'm coming to a Black Girls Boulder event, what am I going to experience in terms of community?
So, you know, I think I mentioned this. That has been the most challenging thing for me because in my mind, I want there to be like 50 folks showing up to every single thing that I do and just like fall in love with it. And it's more like five.
Mm.
And, it depends on the space. Like I said, my focus is very training focused and education focused. And folks really like that space because they want to be in a space with someone they relate to. And so I feel like even though these spaces I've created have been effective and impactful, just based and truthfully, this has always been sort of my motto. I'm like, if I taught a class and there was one person in the room and that one person was happy, I did my job.
Mm.
I'm like that rapper. Like I can rap to one person in the audience. I don't need there to be 5 million people to feel
Yeah.
fulfilled. And you know, that has been fulfilling, but I want to do more. And
Mm.
that's why I created a business so that I could do this festival called the Blackout Boulder Fest. And my goal is to try to celebrate the little bit of Black excellence in climbing that is out there because no, we are not out there in any major way.
Yeah.
But the ones who are out there, these people are so dope. They're so amazing. They need to be recognized, they need to be seen. And truthfully, I just like the idea of the magic of us all coming together. That is my literal idea of community is that if I can get every Black climber across the United States to meet me in the middle of the country for this event, I'm good. That's the mic drop moment for me.
Yeah. What's interesting is that my background is in physical education, like from bachelor's degree through doctoral degree.
Nice.
It's physical education. So I got a community of scholars. There's a few Black scholars that do physical education stuff. And the research says that Black girls have less opportunities to participate in sport and physical activity than almost anybody else. So we have these stereotypes, right? And we think just because we watch the Olympics and, Black girls are the fastest, or excuse me, Black women are the fastest, or we see the WNBA, Black women, there's a lot of Black women. Those are two sports. But all of these other sports, right, that we see a lot of white women participating in, though there are more spaces in all of the other sports and physical activities that we could be occupying, but we don't, and we don't have access to all of those. And so I think the work that you're doing meets a need. I know the work that you're doing meets a need that we have in our community. And I think the more that you continue to grow and keep doing what you're doing, there's going to be more and more Black girls who get into bouldering and other activities. We spoke about like the community that you're trying to create, but I'm also interested in like the ecosystem of Black outdoor entrepreneurs and advocates and activists. And so can you talk about maybe the community that you have of other Black folks who are working in these outdoor industries that support you and how you all support one another?
Yeah, it's interesting because I'll be honest, that is what is lacking for me. There's not enough Black outdoor entrepreneurs. There's a lot of activists, there's a lot of us giving of ourselves, and it's exhausting.
Mm,
I will tell you, free work with things that you love is exhausting. So, my mentor on this project that I'm doing now comes from um, it wasn't necessarily a male focus, but the organization or the group is called BLC Crew, and it
mhm.
was Brothers of Climbing. And so one of the founders of that, Mikhail Martin, has been mentoring me and really supporting the spaces that I'm trying to create, especially with this event. But even he will say, like, it's exhausting. You do a lot of this work, and the only compensation is sort of that emotional fulfillment, and that's fine. But when you also have the rigors of your day job and you just want to be paid to do this thing that you love and you don't know how,
Mm,
that's the challenge. And that's where I want to take the festival. I really want to take the festival into figuring out how to have funds to help startup companies for Black outdoor and
right.
out folks, because even one of the organizations locally based here, actually, it's not even an organization. There's a business called Black Outdoor Adventures that I was a huge, huge fan of pre-COVID. I would support all the stuff that she would do. I loved the idea of it, and it was successful. There, I mean, to some degree, I'm sure she will say, there were challenges, but and COVID hit, and I haven't seen a resurgence in that business,
Mhm.
and I want to see more of that, because what we're seeing is that these North Faces, these big, massive outdoor companies are riding the trend, and anybody can look at any consumer report and we know who's spending the money. So it's very easy for them to get excited about these Black focused organizations or groups and take not advantage of us, but capitalize off of the work that we do. And we
Yeah,
don't get any money from
that's
that.
right.
And they, like, if you really wanted to level the playing field, invest in some of these startup businesses. And they're trying to do, there's some companies that are trying to do these initiatives, but I don't know how we get to where the playing field is level.
Yeah.
I mean, it's America, so we're playing catch up, and we will always be playing catch up. And I don't think, any of these industries will ever let us exceed where they are. So, I don't care. That's what I'm going to keep fighting for, but that's what I want to see, So I've had support, the adaptive climbing group, Karima Batts, who founded that organization. She's a Black woman, and she's, someone who she's running a nonprofit, a successful nonprofit, and has been for nearly or over 10 years. And so, and these are all folks who uplift me, who support me. But again, I want to see us in this space in a sustainable way, so we don't get burnt out, because it's very, very easy to get burnt out.
So Tiffany, I'm gonna ask a tough question, or I'm gonna make a tough statement, and then I want to hear your response. I believe, and this is part of my work being a college professor and mentoring students and hearing Black students talk about what they want to do when they graduate. And then also being very involved in Black communities where I live. I always hear Black folks talking about, I want to start a nonprofit. Like very rarely is the first thing that comes to mind, like, I want to start a business, a for-profit business. And I feel like more so than other folks, we go over to like being nonprofit. And sometimes I think we feel like that's more altruistic than having a business. So do you think like we need to start indexing more like, I'm starting a business. When the business gets established, then I'm doing a nonprofit. Like, are we doing it backwards?
So I love this question, because it's so unfair. First of all, we cannot compete with our white counterparts who have generational wealth and they have family who will help them with their startup companies. So a lot of the challenge and the reason we go towards the nonprofit route is because it's easier to get
Mm.
money to start. If I wanted to start a nonprofit for Black girls who climbed and really changed Black Girls Boulder into an official nonprofit, which I had always said I was never going to do because that was not my intention. This is an initiative and it was training focused. And once I figured out what I wanted to do as a business in this space, I would go that route.
Mm.
But trying to get money to start a business is very difficult. And the funny thing about it is, Black women are like the biggest group of new entrepreneurs, but we don't get VC money. We don't get banks willing to give us money. Like, I have an idea for a business that I want, but I would need over $1 million to start it. And so I have no idea how to move forward with it other than to piecemeal smaller endeavors and hopefully, fingers crossed, I get enough recognition to being able to get financial support. We barely, and I will say there's some companies, I'm not necessarily trying to name drop any of these companies, but there's some companies that are doing these, founder
Mhm.
Slack channels and space and creating these opportunities and spaces to create access. And maybe it will help and it will work because there is that clear recognition that there's a lack, and they'll say a lack of BIPOC, which is the safety term and umbrella
That's right.
term just to refer to any non-white individual. But, you know, even in those spaces, when I'm in these supposedly BIPOC spaces, which they're not really BIPOC, but I'm in these like new founder spaces, the folks that are the most aggressive and successful and talking and this, that, and third, they're always the white folks. And I just say we don't have the same support. So I
Mm.
can't be mad at people for starting a nonprofit because it's the easiest path to getting money. Because you're going to give money to me saying I want to help Black kids. But are you going to give me money to say I want to build a facility that gives people access to this, da, 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 and it's like, well, what have you built? What have you done? And like it's
Mm.
just the selling of yourself and the getting the actual support is hard. And if you don't have a business background, even just understanding how to be successful and make it past those first 3 to 5 years, you may have this really good idea, but you don't know how to make it sustainable. So there's just like there's not enough financial literacy in the Black community, there's not enough um, education surrounding business and how to start a business without going to business school, which, as we know, not everyone is fortunate enough to do. It's just there's just a lot that has created barriers
Mm.
to doing that. And when we're talking about the outdoors, I can't compete with the North Face. I can't.
Mm.
No one, and who's going to give me enough money to get even close to the billions of dollars in revenue that they net? Like that, and so it doesn't mean I can't be in the space and that I won't be in the space because I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. I may not be where I want to be as fast as I want to be, but I'm not built to just roll over.
Yeah.
But it's difficult without people seeing me and other folks that look like me at that level. They're not going to even try.
So
And
let me
so
ask
that's why we got to be out here.
let me ask another challenging question, because I wrestle with things. I wrestle with stuff, right? So before I ask the question, I want to say this because I think this is something that Black folk who are in entrepreneurial spaces, who are trying to do good uplift work, maybe need to think about. You made a great point about how the capital maybe needed to sustain or maintain a for-profit business is different than starting a nonprofit. And so maybe we have to start to think about, and I don't have an answer to this, what does the reverse path look like? What does the path look like going from nonprofit to for-profit? That doesn't mean you turn your nonprofit into a for-profit, but how do you leverage what you've built in the nonprofit to then start your for-profit business? And I don't know what that looks like, but
I mean, it's probably leveraging those relationships that you
yeah,
built through the nonprofit.
yeah.
Essentially, that's what you have to do. The other thing I'd like to see more of is collaboration.
Mm.
I think there needs to be more interconnectivity between people who are in similar spaces. And what's unfortunate is that we come from a mentality of there can only be one of us, because historically that is how it was. If you got that receptionist job at the bank,
Yeah.
you're the only Black person at the
Yeah.
that bank, working at that bank. And so we have a hard time uplifting and sort of connecting and working with each other, because we feel like we're going to outdo the other person,
Mhm.
instead of seeing it as a potential partnership,
Yeah.
as a way to blow it up. And it's just like there's just so much generational trauma that we live with, that we pass along and think that this is how it has to be because this is how it's always been. And we just keep repeating these habits and these cycles. And I am going to do the same thing that you're doing, asking difficult questions, challenging folks, because I'm never going to just settle with that being how it has to be, because I don't want it to be that way. And you can't just talk about the change. You have to be that change. I know that's kind of cliche, but it's so true.
Okay, you set me up really good for the question, okay? You talked about sometimes we get too comfortable being the only one. And when there's been a culture built around, or tradition built around being the only one, you don't know how to, maybe you're not good at being one of many. I think a lot of that is rooted in the shortcomings of diversity and inclusion. So we got the Black person here, right? That's the D&I, that's the only one. And I don't know if diversity and inclusion efforts are really working for us. I don't even know if we should, if some big company dangles the D&I thing, part of me is like, it's time to step away from that. It's time because personally, I am not at a loss of having a diverse group of coworkers, neighbors, friends. Like, I'm not at a loss for that. What's missing for me is access to other Black folk who are trying to build. And so I think in some ways that's more important than the D&I efforts. And so I would like to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, in the climbing world, everybody is screaming Jedi, Jedi, because they've added justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion into the conversation. And it's interesting because I was a part of a program that had a DEI consultant who was not a person of color. And there were no person, I mean, the founder, I guess, so it's
Don't get in trouble. Go ahead.
here's what I feel about DEI work.
Okay.
It feels very in the moment.
Mm.
It felt very 2020, and this is something we have to do because this is something we have to do. But I don't think companies, organizations, or groups really saw an end game to it. Like, what is that? What are we actually trying to do? And I have never been good at the idea of working for someone. And it's not because I don't want to be the only Black person, or I don't want to be one of a couple of Black folks. I want to know that my voice is being heard. And sometimes when you're screaming loudly in these spaces, you're never going to be heard. And I guess for me, I don't know what companies are doing other than adding a safety statement to their website to say, we support DEI, we have a DEI statement, and that is not an action. Having someone come into your company to teach you how to be sensitive to Black folks in 2020 is ridiculous to me. That is not the focus. That is not even what we care about, and I'll be honest with you. If one more person asks me what should they be doing for Juneteenth, I'm gonna scream.
Yeah.
It's like, we want actual opportunities. But the problem is, then you get made to feel like you got that opportunity because you were Black.
Man.
And so You know, it's like affirmative action. It's just like a lose-lose. Like you're not really getting what you want. And when you get what you want, you don't feel as good about getting what you want because you don't know if you got what you want because you deserved it or because it was this or that. So I will say if you really care about diversity, equity, and inclusion in whatever avenue that you are in, help cultivate actual opportunities for those people to be self-sustainable and independent. They should not just be dependent on what it is you're going to give to them to make you look better. If it's about how it makes you look, you didn't really do anything. I'm sorry. You just tried to make yourself look good. You didn't help that person. You didn't help that group of people. Like and that's just how I feel about it.
Yeah.
Like if you don't take a portion of your profits away from your CEO who got that bonus of the year and say, you know what? I'm going to invest in that Black startup business that I've been seeing popping and bubbling on Instagram. Like help that is what I want to see on your website. When I read a story on your website, I don't want to read a profile about somebody who's already doing what they're doing, but you ain't doing anything to help them do that thing.
Yeah.
Like, okay, cool.
Yeah.
You just created some exposure, but you're just doing that to make you look woke, and you're not. Like y'all are missing the point completely. And like equity, it's the same in this competitive climbing space. You cannot have a camp, a climbing camp or a training camp or a club that's going to cost $300-400 a month and expect Black folks to get their kids involved in that sport. That is not equity. We're not on the same stage here. You need to figure out pathways. And then it's just everything feels, and when I decide I'm going to do it and I'm going to come into your gym and train my kids, then they all feel like, oh no, you can't come in here. We got our own teams and and you know, so it's, they're doing the most, but truly not doing much of anything, in my opinion. And all it is something to make you look and feel good post 2020.
That's right.
But I say action speaks louder than words. You know, show me the money. That's what I want to see. Where's the money going?
So on that note, how can my audience, who is mostly Black, show you the money and support what it is you're doing? If anyone is interested in learning how to boulder, interested in going outside, interested in getting out of your comfort zone, how can they get in contact with you and what you're doing and get involved and actually be a paid participant in the things that you're trying to do?
Well, my website is where every event that I host is, and I'm in the process of posting up several events in the next few weeks. Some of the things I've kept internal to just my current community of climbers and giving them some priority access to spaces. But blackgirlsboulder.com is my website. That is the best place to get a hold of me, to get involved, to learn about what I'm doing, and to learn how it is evolving, even in regards to my company. And you can find me on Instagram personally at TiffBFirst. I am completely public. I am more focused on the work that I do through my Black Girls Boulder Instagram page, which is exactly what it sounds like, is at Black Girls Boulder. And that is the space where anytime I have things going on, I let folks know. But if you sign up for my email list on my website, y'all get the first word of everything that I'm doing. And, you know, I just say I appreciate your support. If you're interested in climbing and you're nervous about it, just DM me and I will talk you through it. And if I know or have connections in your area, I'll definitely try to connect you with folks so that you have a comfortable and safe experience, because that's really what it's about for me.
Thank you. Tiffany, thank you for taking the time to be with us today and sharing about your experiences as the founder of Black Girls Boulder, as the founder of the Blackout Bouldering Festival. And again, all of you who are listening, make sure you go out and support this sister and the things that she's trying to do. Even if you aren't interested in bouldering, find some way to support her so that she can get like the next generation of Black girls into the sport. And I thank you for joining us. And Tiffany, once again, I appreciate you.
Thank you, Langston.
Hello, everyone. Thank you again for joining our conversation with Tiffany Blount, founder of Black Girls Boulder. If you like what you heard and you enjoyed our show, I would ask that you become a member of our Patreon, where you can become one of our founding 55 members. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our conversation with Tiffany Blount, founder of Black Girls Boulder. If you liked and enjoyed the conversation, please consider becoming one of our founding 55 patrons. For $5 a month, you can get access to our live conversations and early access to the podcast and YouTube releases of the videos and some of our special content as well. This will help our effort to hire an intern to help with the production of the show. So again, we ask for your support. If you're able to do so, become one of our founding 55 patrons. And you can also support the show by hitting the like button and leaving a comment. Thank you, and I appreciate your time.